What's your take on worship music that originates from groups that are slightly wacky or even completely heretical, but the song itself is not? This is in reference to using the song in leading worship.
Okay, this is my take on it. When I'm looking at songs that I want in a worship set, I do not want them to be doctrinally dumb. They need to actually represent what the Bible has to say. So, obviously I can tell that that's where you're at with that whole thing. As far as where they come from, Jesus at one point in Matthew chapter 10 said, if you're not for me, you're against me, right? And so that's something that I use in evangelism all the time. But when he was talking to the apostles in Mark 9:40, he said, what had happened was some of the apostles came up and said that there's guys that are casting out demons and they're not with us, basically. They're going out doing ministry and they're doing ministry in your name and they're not with us. Should we rebuke them? Should we tell them to shut up? And Jesus said, he who is not against us is on our side. And so, there's a balance between those two things. And so I like to try to keep that balance. What I'd rather is that I didn't know what kind of doofus wrote the song. That's what I would rather. If the guy's a doofus, because if it's glorifying to the Lord, then it's just glorifying to the Lord. So that's my take on that whole thing. There are ministries that bring so much baggage to the table that it's not worth it. And so there have been times when some ministry has done something or, been in some situation where the worship leader is getting a lot of flack because that ministry is involved. And I just go, just ditch the song, And so it's one of those things. And so there was, back in the 80s, there was a split in Calvary chapels. And so some of the Calvaries went off and they became vineyards. And vineyard music was one of those things that was an issue, with Calvary chapels, because these guys left us and that kind of thing. And I just never really got into that. I think that there was good reason for vineyards to separate from Calvary Chapel in the sense that they were going a different direction, and I didn't agree with the direction, and so God bless you, man. And they're still Christians. They still follow the Lord and stuff. They just got off into some goofy stuff, but then they would be putting out music, and some of the songs were good, and so it was one of those issues where should we use vineyard music or not? And I just tried to make it a non-issue. Because again, what I want to do is glorify the Lord, and if God is being glorified through a certain song, then I'm good with that. And again, I'd rather not know what kind of goofy person wrote the song, right? The other thing you have in this situation is once you start going down that road in this sense, and again, I'm not saying that there aren't times that I just bag it with those guys. But if you start going down that road, then you're going to be, looking at the life and the lifestyle of everybody who's ever written a Christian song, and you go down that road, and you're dealing with musicians, and every musician knows exactly what I'm talking about. You're dealing with musicians, and some of these guys are really dumb. They've done really dumb things, and they act in really dumb ways, and they may have been in a situation where when they wrote the song, they were right on with the Lord, and then later on they're a flake on all kinds of levels. And so you have that. In fact, some of the hymns that have been written were written by guys who backslid. And so one of the famous ones, I'm trying to remember which one it is. Prone to Wander. I was just listening to music, and so I can't remember what the tune is. You guys know what?
I know what song you're talking about. I'll look it up.
In any case, it's a great hymn, and the story goes, I believe, if I'm getting the story right, it was back in the 1800s. What is it?
Come thou fount of every blessing.
Oh yeah, come thou fount of every blessing. tune my heart to sing your praise. And it goes through and talks about the fact that he's prone to wander and that kind of stuff. And there is a story about this guy meeting up with a lady in a stagecoach, basically, or a carriage, and she's singing the song, or she's humming the tune, and he goes, "I wrote that song." And at the time that he's talking to her, he's backslidden, and he's just a hot mess at that point.
Robert Robinson.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening in a situation like that is, what are you going to do with that song? Because the guy backslid, and as far as I know, I don't even know if he ever returned to the Lord at that point. And so we're singing a song that's awesome, that's written by a guy who walked away from the Lord. So you got these situations that come up, and so, like I said, I'd rather not know. If somebody's making a deal about it, then I'll go through and I'll take a look at it. And if it ever becomes a situation where most of the people in the fellowship are going to just be thinking about the flakiness of the group that's involved instead of thinking of the Lord when they're singing the song, then it's not worth singing the song. So
okay, so what about this? Because it's what I've heard people say, and typically you have, at least in our time right now, bands that are really popular, and actually their music is awesome, in the sense of they're extremely talented, like Hillsong United and different churches. And what happens is guys will say, well, for new believers or for unbelievers, they'll bring them in using worship music because it's so awesome, but then once they're in the church, they're teaching them heretical views. So what would you say to, not the churches per se playing songs, because you address that, but for using it as, and this is where the internet freaks out, and sometimes there's validity and sometimes it's just internet trolls, but to that point, what about the stumbling block of using it as a trap for people that don't know any better until they're in the church? What would you speak to that?
You mean in the sense of those churches?
Yeah, they say that they'll use
them.
So
like the whole Hillsong thing with all the corruption and all that kind of stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
These guys go to Hillsong?
Well, they'll get brought in because of the music attracts them, and then once they're there, that's when they're getting
brought into where is what I'm asking.
Heretical teaching.
Oh yeah. It's like one of the things with that whole thing is that you can have heretics bringing people in with hymn music. For that matter, it doesn't even have to be the music that comes from these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't know that this happens, but you could have situations where Mormons are using Christian music and they're using that to because it's awesome, and they're using that to attract young people into the cult of Mormonism.
Right. Yeah.
And so. If that's the case, then obviously, God's going to take care of that whole thing. He's the one who's going to judge in that situation. Right. And I think, with the groups that are the people who are involved in churches that are, if it's heretical, the people who are involved in those churches and doing worship, they need to get out of there. And if that's, being used as a tool to deceive people, then God's going to judge it. So, but I don't know. Do I need to walk around judging it?
Yeah, and it's one of those things and I know you've already covered this, but I got into boycotting people because I didn't want to support their views. Yeah. And then I started going down the road of researching all the stuff, and pretty soon, I'm living in a hut. Can't even go buy groceries because every place I go to just live life support something I don't want to support.
Right, exactly.
So eventually you hit the point where we're in the world, you have to live in it and somehow manage your witness accordingly.
Exactly. And so again, with this whole situation, when it becomes a big enough deal, like I said, I like to go through life, specifically with the worship issue. I like to go through life oblivious. And if it's a good song, it's a good song. And if somebody comes up and says, hey, so-and-so wrote that song, I'm like, who's so-and-so? And why are you telling me this? And, then they start to give me the information. I go, are you, and I ask them, are you sure about that information? Mm-hmm. Did you check that? Because some of this stuff can just be gossip, right? And so are you sure about that information? And da-da-da-da-da, that kind of thing. And are you saying that these guys aren't Christians? Are you saying that, or they don't agree with us as far as cessationism versus the continuance of the gifts of the
Right.
Spirit? Or are they in disagreement with us as far as the timing of the rapture of the church? Or are they, what are they in disagreement about? What's the issue here? And with some of this stuff, there are churches that do silly things. One church that's known for this stuff, I don't often watch their services, but I watched one service where a lady comes out with a staff that looks like Gandalf's staff, that specifically designed to look like Gandalf's
Sure.
staff, and comes out and does this whole production about there's this whole thing where they're coming out of the mines of Moria. Sorry to take you off into Lord of the Rings land, but they're coming out of the mines of Moria, and Gandalf is standing in front of a bad guy called a Balrog, and he's on a little bridge, and he says, "You shall not pass," and down comes the staff, and the bridge breaks, and the Balrog, goes down and stuff like that. Well, this lady was imitating that and trying to make the Balrog Satan and saying, "You shall not pass," and pounding the staff down, and just complete silliness, complete ridiculous silliness. My construction worker buddies would be laughing their heads off, maybe throwing things at that person, at that point. And it's irrelevant to non-believers. And the only people who jump on those kind of bandwagons are usually superstitious, goofy believers. And so, but if they were singing a song there, I'd laugh at the Gandalf impersonation, and if the song was good, the Gandalf impersonation, it's stupid and it's nothing but superstition on a lot of levels, and Satan's not afraid of your stupid little staff.
It's amazing to me that Christians, I'm going through the book of Proverbs, and one of the themes is the gullible. And it's amazing to me how many Christians will sit in that environment and just be so gullible on those things when people are laughing at you.
Yeah, it's cheerleading. Is what it is. It's cheerleading, and I had enough of that when I played sports. I don't need it in church. So, in any case, the issue is my big issue is it doctrinally sound? Again, a lot of people get crazy with this stuff. When you're talking about doctrinally sound, not every word of a song needs to be perfect to be glorifying to the Lord. You have songs in the Bible, the book of Psalms, where the writer is accusing God of leaving him. Where are you? What do you do? Is that biblically sound? Is that doctrinally correct? God has said, "I will never, no, never leave you nor forsake you," right? And so there are issues where you have Psalms where the writer is talking about his feelings, and usually what happens is in the psalm it turns around and the guy gets his head straight and it ends up well. That's usually what happens in the book of Psalms. But it doesn't mean that the song, everything in the song itself is absolutely doctrinally correct, because a lot of times the writer is writing from an emotional point of view, and he doesn't have his head straight when he first starts writing them. And it's in the Bible, right? And so you got to keep that in mind. And then the other thing that you have with Christian songs, I'm just going to start, going off here. I think that the lyrics should be good. I hate lyrics that are grammatically incorrect. I hate lyrics that are goofy, kind of cheesy, and that's a personal. Some people love cheese, and so I'm good with that. I love you, brother, sister, but I don't like cheesy songs, and I'm kind of getting tired of the water theme. everything's waves and roaring oceans and water everywhere. So I'm kind of getting tired of that theme. And, and again, I'm just saying things, and I'm probably going to get, lambasted for this.
Yeah, but because we do have a radio station. That
there's stuff that you see in Christian music, that can be goofy. One of the things you need to remember is when a guy's writing a song, he's generally got to find words that rhyme. And so if you're looking for words that rhyme, you're not always going to be able to come out with the best lyric on a situation. And so I give people grace on that. You're also going to have situations where writers of songs are trying to bring across the point of view of the person that is singing the song. He's writing from the point of view of somebody who is experiencing life like the psalmist did, and taking their point of view and placing that on God. So, again, with the illustration of why did you leave me, God?
Okay, so I have an example of this, and this has come up to me before. The overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
You were going to do that, yeah.
And that's one of the things. And people will get mad and go, God is not reckless.
Right.
How come you're singing about that? And they're focused on the nuance and not all the stuff that you're saying, where you have the heart of the psalmist. You have the idea that God sending his son to go to the cross to die for me. There's an attitude about that is reckless to do anything that it takes to save me.
Right, exactly.
And you can't just make that a heretical doctrinal statement without...
And you have to understand the word reckless. Right? Reckless means a disregard. It's the idea of a disregard for the consequences.
Right.
That's the idea of being reckless. And so if I'm a reckless driver, I am driving in such a way that I don't care about the consequences to myself or to anybody who's in the car with me. That's reckless. Or to anybody who's on the outside, right? So that's reckless, a disregard for the consequences. And so when you look at the love of God from my point of view, the fact that the whole story of the fall and sin and salvation is reckless on the part of God, because why would you allow that to happen in the first place? I don't know all the reasons for that. I think that it's because in the end God gets exactly what he wants, and it's an awesome blessing. I think that's the ultimate answer to that whole thing. But from my point of view, this is crazy. Why would God put up with me for however long he put up with me before I became a Christian? And why would he pay such a huge price to end up getting me? And so again,
and still puts up with us now.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, when you're looking at that from the point of view of the psalmist, and that's the guy who wrote the song, that's crazy. That's over the top. That's huge. That's very dramatic. What God did there. And so when I first heard the song, I was like, heard Reckless, and I was like, immediately, I didn't even spend seconds on the whole idea that God was trying to run people over or something. It was just like, that's a great description from my point of view. It's like, yeah, you're over the top on this guy. And besides, in the song, he explains exactly what he means. So I don't know. With the stuff, give the guy a break. And if you can't come up with if you're not a songwriter, I don't know. A little humility is something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the work of others. And so there have been some songs over the years that I've listened to, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just yakking again. But when I was a kid, they had albums, right? And so when you got an album, you had one song, maybe two songs on the album that were just hits. It's like they were singles that were just all over the radio, and all the rest of the album, some of it was a little bit, was kind of a sleeper, and it could be a hit too. but some of it is just filler. Some guy just sat down and in 5 minutes he wrote a song just to fill in. A lot of worship songs to me are filler because there's not a lot of thought to them. There's not a lot of content to them, and they can be filler. And I don't really like songs like that. But on the other hand, when it's thoughtful and it's worshipful and it's obviously glorifying to the Lord, yes, it can just, worship is killer. And I think that most songs need to be like that. So
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.